now call this meeting to order at 8:05 p.m. Hopefully everyone is in attendance.
Did you put the gavel again?
Yeah, I did. It's a problem. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Great, the minutes pass. Okay, we don't have any officer updates and reports, and we're going to jump directly into voting on legislation. And so we have 5 pieces of legislation up for approval today. We can go ahead and start with the Future Alumni Committee. I think we talked about this kind of in depth last week. But are there any further questions or comments on this before we put this to a vote? Great. Then is there a motion to vote?
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All right, you can go ahead and text it. All right, so this seems like it's going to pass, most likely. So while those are coming in, we can move on to the second piece of legislation, so that's to create the senior committee. Is there a motion to vote?
Motion. Second.
All right, go ahead. All right, so let's move on to the next piece. We can go ahead and vote on the Rice Economics Initiative Task Force. This is with Nathan, from Nathan and Jazz. Is there a motion to?
Motion.
Second. All right. And while we're voting on this one, I think Vidin had an announcement, Ari, the EMS in charge housing proposal.
Okay, so based on the college feedback from senators and presidents, it looks like the best method would be to take out the rotation system, so make it, and instead of 2 in charges, all in charges. So that seems like what the feedback we got, but because of how the legislation works, we can't vote on it today. We have to vote on it next year.
Not true. You can motion to amend, pass that motion, and then prior notice has already been met.
But that's a substantial change in the nature of the.
Because prior notice as to the text of the legislation has been made, and that period of prior notice has led to a proposed amendment, that amendment can be voted on and the legislation passed on the same day. Because the purpose of prior notice is to ensure that there is that period of discussion. And if we were to say that the rule is that if there's an amendment, it gets postponed, you could perpetually propose amendments to stall legislation indefinitely.
Right, but I mean, I think it substantially changes the spirit of the proposal. Like, it completely changes how the proposal works. And so, from my perspective, I think that warrants further discussion, and that's why we pushed into, or we're pushing to introduce a new version next year.
That's not a decision that the president can make. If there is a motion and a second, there must be a motion.
Yeah, I don't understand what's happening.
What is the motion to do?
The table to next semester.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Great. That is tabled to next year, and we're looking forward to a new version of that.
So just to reiterate, it would be taking out the rotation system, and it would be instead of 2 in charges per college, it would be all in charges at every college. So we'll probably introduce that during the first essay meeting of next year. Just ahead. Thank you.
Great. All right. So the final piece of legislation that we're looking at, and that relates to our discussion point for today, but is to recommend the formation of the CLIC advisory board. I think we also discussed this yesterday, and we will be having a discussion with Dean Schuma and Dr. Salaberry, who are here today. Thank you for being here. But are there any questions on that piece of legislation that was introduced 2 weeks ago? Before we... Great. Is there a motion to vote?
Motion.
Second. All right, so we can go ahead and vote on that. All right, well, those are coming in. We can go ahead and move on to the next agenda items of position approvals and recognition. And so over the past few weeks, we've been doing the SA. We've been appointing positions to the SA committees, SA university standing committees, and our executive team. And so we're really excited to announce a lot of our new team members. Before we go into those, we do, as the SA Senate, need to approve a couple of other positions. And so we were asked by CATRE to approve members to the CATRE Friendly Committee. You can pull up, I think those two student names are there, but they're two students, and this just needs to be approved by the Senate. CATRE Friendly Committee. Up there. Okay, that's fine. Do you know what they're? Oh, yeah, there we go. It's Aurea and Geneva. And so if there's no concerns there, is there a motion to approve these?
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Great. And now we can move on to the positions. And so let's start with Abby with committee chairs and student initiative project leaders.
Okay, do we need to approve all the positions?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so we have our new academics chairs are Paul Wu and Daniel Zhang. Environmental will be Ryan Sathoff and Tierra Moore. Our new future alumni chair, Sarah Correa. Senior committee chairs will be Hannah Millimet and Morgan McNeil. Our student life co-chairs are Peter Yun and Sanjana Raghunathan. And then our two student initiative project leaders are Allison McKibben and Delaney Siddell. So.
If you were one of those people, could you please stand up? Great. Is there a motion to approve this? Second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Great. Congratulations. Moving on to university standing committees.
Awesome. I'm going to announce the names, and if you could stand when your name is called. For teaching, we have Maha Aziz and Amber Lowe. For admissions, we have Rishi Suresh, Sam Peg, and Maple Zhao. For athletics, we have Tommy Yin, Michael Saad, and Jeremy Reiskin. Yay. For examinations and standing, we have Logan Carl, Jackie Olive, and Ethan Wadowski. Library, we have Shuya Shao and Shi Zhang. For parking, we have Jasmine Silva, who is also a senator. For President Lecture Series, we have Colette Kendrick, Avinash Shivkumar, and Shushmit Shuktankar. And for the undergraduate curriculum, we have Christy Fu, who is also a senator, Nicole Moody, and Ed Tingley.
Is there a motion to?
Second.
Great. All those in favor? All those opposed? Awesome. Okay, finally moving on to directors, historian, and parliamentarian.
Okay, so our historian is Natalie Polachuk. Oh, we're calling your name, stand up. Here. Okay. Our director of elections is Sophie Herbert. Our parliamentarian is Zach Fernbaum. And our directors of marketing are Tanvi Nagpal and Lisa Huang.
Is there a motion to? All those in favor? All those opposed? Great. Congratulations to all those people. We're really excited for a great year ahead. And we're really glad to finally have all those positions filled. So moving on to the next agenda item, we have Becca Ham-Conrad, Student Director of OWEEK, as well as Chris Landry with First Year Programs here to do a brief discussion around OWEEK 2014, what's on their plate, and a brief time for discussion around that important week that's coming up soon.
150
days.
Yeah, we just want to talk to you guys about the changes that OWEEK has gone through in the past, how it's changing this year, and then do you guys have any questions, comments, anything that we can address? I made a really cool slideshow also. Yep, so I'm Becca, I'm the student director. Chris Landry is the assistant director of first year programs. We work with the coordinating team, who then work with the advisors, who then work with the new students directly. But to start off, so a couple ways that OWEEK has changed over the last couple years. One of the first ones is Rice Group. So this has been part of a campus-wide push to have more Rice spirit rather than just college spirit. Rice Group started just as sister groups at another college my freshman year, and it has since transitioned to being a group of students from all the different colleges that have shared interests, and then last year again, so that each new student was in a sister group with their roommates group, so that they would have more connections and more reasons to stay in touch with their Rice group beyond just a trip to the zoo, which I heard was fun. Another thing is Passport to Houston. If you were in OWEEK last year, you may have noticed that that didn't happen. That was because Passport to Houston was an event that was extremely draining for new students. It was moving 1,000 people to generally a location that couldn't really handle that kind of thing. And it was a whole night of OWEEK that could be used better for sleeping or other campus activities. Advisor training. Some people may not know this, advisor training actually used to be wet for all advisor training, and that was a huge problem for several reasons. First of all, there weren't any students on campus during advisor training. It was not appropriate for them to see their advisors like that. And second, it got to the point where it would be move-in day and parents would be coming in and there would be advisors who were still hungover. So it has transitioned now so that more than half of advisor training is now dry. Additionally, this year we extended advisor training in the spring. So there is Advising 101 for new advisors to give them a sense of what the experience would be like beyond the resources and training they would get. iPrep has also changed. iPrep moved off campus for similar reasons. Having new students around during advisor training was essentially stressful for everyone. And also, iPrep is really a time for new international students to get their paperwork in order, to get any cell phones, bank accounts, that kind of thing, and less of a time for them to move into their dorms. That's also an ongoing process, working on iPrep and really streamlining it with OWEEK and making sure that that's a smooth transition. So things that we're working on for this year is, first of all, post-OWEEK engagement. OWEEK, as everyone remembers, is a very overwhelming time, and we really want to make sure that we extend the orientation period and the connection with advisors and coordinators beyond OWEEK to make sure that new students are getting the support they need throughout the year. We're also working on having better support for some student groups that have approached us with concerns. The first is the LGBTQIA community. We're working on having more support. So you guys know the health relationships talk we had last year used to be girl-guy talk, and we're really trying to move it away from being extremely heteronormative and making sure that we support all students in that, and then making sure that new students are really aware of their resources. International students, I mentioned before with iPrep, we're also working to expand support for them. Extending the information retention period. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of information that is given to new students during OWEEK, and it's extremely overwhelming, and the chances of them remembering all of it are less than zero. It's just not going to happen. So something that we've been working on is this year is going to be an OWL space for both advisors and new students, so that everyone can get more information over the summer and extend the period where they're having to learn things and get exposed to new resources that hopefully they can retain them better moving past OWEEK. Rice Groups in Rice Valley, I mentioned before, Rice Groups is kind of an ongoing process. We're not sure exactly what it's going to look like this year, but last year we think was a pretty good model for it. We're going to try and make sure to streamline it and make sure to really ensure that new students can get cross-campus connections. Rice Rally, first of all, we're going to move away from the fire ant route this year. That was a huge problem last year. But really making sure that Rice Rally is very Rice spirit centric. We're very lucky that we're coming off of some really huge football wins both last year and this year, so that should give us a lot of momentum to make Rice Rally a really great event. Last thing is sleep. The biggest thing we hear from new students, advisors, coordinators, anyone who attended O-Week at all, is that the week after O-Week they just crashed. People get sick, people are they just crashed, they're exhausted. So part of that is taking things like Passport to Houston out of O-Week, making sure that people have the chance to sleep, which also comes into the retention thing, because if no one's sleeping, no one's going to remember anything that happened during O-Week. So just so you guys know, we do get a lot of suggestions for things to add, take out, change about O-Week. People email coordinators, people email advisors, people email us, and I'm sure everyone will have suggestions that they want to give. It's one of the great things, everyone loves O-Week so much that they really want to make it great for the next people, and a lot of suggestions are actually really important for us to consider. Basically what will happen is if you give us a suggestion, we will talk about it. We'll probably ask to meet with you, get more details, see how far you've thought things out, and then we'll talk about what offices or programs would be involved in this. Every office on campus essentially is involved in O-Week in some way, so it's important for us to involve everyone in the discussion. What we're probably going to think about is if it's something that makes sense to put in O-Week, because again, there's a lot going on in O-Week, or if it's something we want to put in after O-Week to make sure that the orientation process continues, that these students are still engaged with their advisors, and to make sure that they have additional resources after O-Week. And honestly, for a lot of things, it'll be more beneficial for them to hear it after O-Week when they have the time to think about it or choose to go to something or not, or really think about what they want to be engaged in. Because sleep is important. And this is the biggest thing when people bring us suggestions when we think about putting it in O-Week. O-Week is so packed. There's really very little free time. And any free time they have, we want them to rest, be healthy, and retain information.
The other thing with this is, by the time a lot of people realize that they want to introduce something to O-Week, we are already pretty far along in the process. So right now we are finalizing the schedules, we are reaching out to departments about presentations, and so to add a block of time to the schedule is really difficult at this point. So if in the future you have suggestions or things that you want to adapt or add in O-Week or address and talk to us about, the fall is probably the best time to do that.
So nice picture. So these are the O-Week coordinators for this year. They went on retreat in January, and while they were on retreat, they came up with 4 goals for O-Week this year. Just so you guys know, this is what we're looking at for O-Week 2014, is increased advisor accountability, and this is part of the post-O-Week engagement. Creating supportive networks, enhancing Rice spirit, and developing community across campus. So that's what they're looking at as they're working over the summer and all this semester as well. And so also about the coordinators, just to give you guys a sense of kind of the massive amount of behind-the-scenes work that goes into O-Week. I know there's actually a decent number of coordinators here, but coordinators will spend this entire semester. They've been working all semester since January on this, and they're going to spend the entire summer. They're going to be here all summer. This is going to be essentially a full-time job. And beyond them, again, there's the Office of First Year Programs that's working even behind the scenes from them, working since last O-Week ended on this O-Week. And again, Dean Hutch's office, the Office of Academic Advising, Wellness, OISS. It's a huge, massive process with a lot of moving pieces. So sometimes it may seem like things might be getting lost in the shuffle. It could just be because it's coming from another direction, it's coming through another office, or again, there isn't really time in this current schedule to work on it, in which case we'll either talk about it for the next O-Week, or we'll try and work into something in post-O-Week engagement.
So I think we've got a minute or two, I know all the busy agenda, but if there are any questions that we can address now, we're happy to do that, and if not, Beck and I will stick around afterwards as well, if it's something more specific. Okay.
they working phones and iPad this year?
Yes, so they are going to be closer to campus. They're going to be at the Wyndham Hotel, which is right at the corner of campus by BRC. Part of the schedule is built in so that there's going to be a bus route that goes from Rice Village, where there are banks and phone companies, as well as to Target and one other stop to kind of help students adjust. But it is up to students to do that on their own. There's not necessarily someone who's going to tell them, you have to go do this right now. So we'll get the message out that we know it was difficult last year for some students. Leah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I know that you guys talking about supporting student groups like the LGBTQIA community and international students, but could we also make sure to reach out to minority students, just because Rice is much more diverse than most high schools in the United States, and so I would love to see possibilities focusing on that as well.
Yeah, we'll work with the Austin Multicultural Affairs to see what they're comfortable with. Again, as part of understanding that there are other departments that are more attuned to certain groups' needs or certain programs, and so rather than stepping on their toes, we definitely ask them. So we'll talk to Captain Black about it. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of freshmen who were international students from my college last year had delayed planes and missed iPads, and their first 2 days of the week were pretty stressful, and they didn't get, as one of them was mine as an advisor, I didn't receive a whole lot of support from OISS. So is there going to be any changes to that this year?
Well, so part of supporting international students that we've talked about is that last year especially, I think a lot of advisors felt like if they were an international advisor or if they had a large number of international students in their group, that they had a lot more pressure than other advisors. And so what we're going to work on doing is just increasing the training for helping international students, especially in that particular circumstance, for all advisor spaces, that we can spread out the weight, especially because I think the last couple of years there have been hurricanes and serious issues with planes from pretty large cities in China especially.
Great. Thanks, Becca and Chris. I think we need to move on to the next agenda item, but if you have any questions, I'm sure they're more than happy to talk to you and listen. But thanks so much. It's such an important. So next up, we're going to have the Alcohol Event Registration Task Force very briefly go through the recommendations. So they've been meeting for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. And today they finalized their final draft of their 4 recommendations. And so I think Brian, Helena, Leah, and Drazer are here to present through these 4 recommendations briefly, and there can be a couple minutes for questions or comments.
Yeah, hey, so we were the undergraduate representatives on the Alcohol Event Registration Task Force, along with Bridget Gorman, Will Rice, the College Master, and a bunch of SJP representatives. So we know we've got a packed schedule tonight, so we're just going to try to get through these pretty quickly, and then if you have any questions, obviously we'll answer those at the end. So when we were sort of looking at a lot of the concerns that students have had about the SJP event registration process, we sort of saw that the main cause of pretty much all of these is just a lack of communication or a gap in information between SJP and students registering events about what exactly is expected on an SJP form and how that process works. So most of our recommendations are really just trying to sort of deal with that cause specifically, and we'll get into them really quickly. So our first big thing is the creation of an SJP event liaison position at each college. This would be a person who would be in charge of just disseminating information about how the process works at their college, as well as ensuring on the college level timely submission of forms, as well as timely completion of follow-up forms, bringing any concerns about the process to SJP, helping to make sure that events are scheduled in such a way that they don't conflict with each other with the whole follow-up next event submission process, several things. And in the appendix, there's a lot more detail on that, which we'll touch on at the end. The second big thing was the separation of the host and server training certifications. So if you're just, a freshman who's coming in and you need to get some service points by, pumping beer for your, public party, then there's a lot on these tests that you really don't need to know. You don't really need to know what a bonding certificate is or stuff like that. So we want to make that a lot simpler for people who are just trying to be a server. And on the flip side, we think that there's a lot of more information that should be passed along to people when they are becoming host certified. And one push alongside with this, mostly on SJP's part, that we agree with is for the host trainings to really make those in person as opposed to something that you just do online. Third main thing, well, a couple of changes to the website itself in terms of what resources are available, specifically having good examples, not just for a generic SJP form, but for the broad types of events that we encounter at our colleges, public parties, pub nights, tailgates in the quad. A lot of those sort of follow similar features, so we think that having like that sort of rubric and template to go off when you're submitting an event can really help out a lot. And then last thing, specifically for Beer Bike, we definitely heard feedback from a lot of coordinators in the past that they didn't really hear much from SJP until maybe like the month of Beer Bike in terms of how the actual event registration process would work. So we're recommending that SJP be included much earlier on in the Campus Wide Beer Bike meeting, specifically late in the fall semester, so that they can go over clearly what exactly, how best works for Beer Bike and Willie League specifically. Yeah, just because Beer Bike is such a specific event, there's a keg tap, there's multiple days, all sorts of stuff going on there. We really wanted to focus on that issue specifically. And then if you go down to the appendix, that's all the details of the SJP event liaison position. As far as logistics, we all thought on the committee thought that it was very important to leave the selection process up to each individual college. Each college government is different, obviously, and so you can tailor your own solution for how to implement this into your existing government framework. For some colleges, it might be easiest to create this as a new position. For some, it might be easiest to roll it into a currently existing position that you just send to SJP. And that's really up to each college to decide for their own. And there's sort of like two sides to this position. One is just sort of interfacing with the SJP to address any concerns with SJP on the part of how the college is submitting their forms, or the concerns of the college in terms of SJP, how that SJP is handling them. And then also on the college side, really making sure everyone is up to speed about like any changes to the process, how the process works, as well as in terms of the host trainings, actually being able to offer these trainings at their colleges. So that it can be a lot more flexible with when you can actually get trained. And a few more details there, and they'll email this out to all you guys, I'm sure, afterwards. But are there any questions that
Would this position just be our CJ?
So at least in a lot of experiences, this Chief Justice isn't exactly the best person for SJP event registrations per se. They're definitely your main contact for the alcohol policy, but a Chief Justice doesn't necessarily have experience with registering events. And the other thing that we want this position to have is direct oversight if possible, over the people in your college that are registering these events. And in many college governments, the Chief Justice doesn't actually have any authority over the socials or other groups that might actually be submitting these forms.
What we recommend in some ways is it's the person who controls the events calendar within the college. Like at Martell, we have a prime minister who works with coordinating, making sure event registration is cleared out, people know their events coming up, and working between those people. So it's a natural fit there, for example, to make sure that person is working with events hosts that they're doing their job correctly.
And it is, if at your college, maybe a Chief Justice is the person to have to do this, and if that's the case, we can absolutely do that. And this also allows the flexibility for, say, you put this into one position this year, maybe next year you decide another position fits better. You have that sort of flexibility.
So, this is a proposed position right now, so what is the timeline on it being like an actual position? Like, is SJP on board with this already, are they not?
So SJP is on board with everything we've put here today.
Yeah, and I talked to Dean Hutchinson earlier today. He approved all of these, and he's directing SJP to implement it immediately.
So it's just a position at this point, it's not like a proposed position. So I can go out and tell someone this.
Right, this is the SA's formal recommendations to SJP, and it has been approved.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Senate gave this task force authority to make recommendations.
I just had a quick question that came out of my conversation. Did you guys consider the fact that you can only have one event registered at a single time, and potential changes to that at all?
I think the critical issue there usually lies in people not doing things in a timely manner and not completing follow-up in a timely manner. Follow-up realistically should not take a long time, since it's just scanning in receipts and answering a couple of questions. So part of the idea of the SJP event liaison is that person that has the specific responsibility of making sure this happens in a timely manner so that other events can be registered early enough before they happen, that any issues with the event plan can be discussed with SJP, and that's not a rushed discussion. Right now, even colleges that submit on time are harmed by other organizations that aren't submitting them on time and that get dealt with first so that their events can still happen. So hopefully clearing out that backlog will help make the process smoother for everyone.
Yeah, I think SJP, from our conversations with them, they were just not comfortable with allowing us to have multiple events under the same name, which I kind of understand, just because it could become a massive, ridiculous backward, which is just, it's a lot of events that could happen.
It's a really easy accountability measure for them, and from our side, having the liaison there means that, for example, Martell will have a backup to events. Somebody will proactively contact SJP and submit a sample form so that before the registration's even cleared out, it's ready to go. So that liaison's there to make sure that communication's happening across all the colleges.
And that person can also make sure that events are spaced far enough away from each other that it's not really an issue.
Yeah, SJP definitely, the submitting information to SJP before you can fill out the actual form is something that they're totally willing to have you do, and they will communicate with you on that. So if you have events in close succession, that's one way of getting the form to a state where all you have to do is plug it into the actual form because the information is correct.
Great. Thank you guys. This was a really quick turnaround and some important recommendations, and they will be implemented soon. So thank you for your service on this committee. Our final agenda item is presentation and discussion on changes to the Center for the Language Center. And so we are very lucky to have Dr. Salaberry and Dean Shumway with us tonight to present and talk through some of these changes. So, Dr. Salaberry. There's a PowerPoint that's open already.
Well, thank you for the invitation to come here to talk to you. I'm just going to go very quickly over a few slides with some basic information in order to set up the discussion, and the longest part of the meeting actually is going to be dedicated to questions from you, and Dean Shumway also can answer some questions as well if he wants to. So a little bit of background here in terms of the center. Even before the center was created, there was an external review. There were a couple of external reviews. The first one was in '94. There were 4 professors, specialists in the area, coming from different universities. And at that point, they made a lot of recommendations. One of them was to change from a 3-hour a week courses to 7 to 9 hours a week, depending on the languages, as you can see there in the slides. Moving forward to 2011, that was the second external review. Again, 4 different universities, the committee members made a number of recommendations, and in particular in terms of the curricular structure, they criticized what the center at that point, created in 1989, had done based on the previous recommendation. It was the hybrid model. In other words, you had 3 hours of class meetings per week, plus 2 hours of lab. That gave 5 credit hours for each course, and of course the second year was 4 credits. They criticized that. They said it was pedagogically unsound. So that was the critique, and the recommendation was to offer the first year courses with 6 credit hours and the second year courses for 4 credit hours. As you know, there was a flyer with information about the changes for next year. It's going to be a transition, but essentially I'm taking Arabic in alphabetical order, the first one of our languages. The structure doesn't change much in terms of the number of courses, semesters. So it's 4 semesters. Essentially, we keep the first year, second year. There's a minor change here, which I'm going to mention in a minute, about distribution. But essentially, you have 6 hours and 3 hours instead of the 6 and 4 recommended by the External Review Committee. The biggest issue here is actually distribution credit. When I looked at this issue before, one thing I noticed is that the External Review Committee came in spring 2011. In fall 2011, the Student Association actually conducted a survey. And in this survey, among the different questions they asked, one of them was about distribution. As you can see, pretty much 80% of the students who participated in the survey argue that distribution is absolutely essential for these courses to have, especially the first year courses. So I was actually very intrigued by this issue because I thought it was an issue related to the quality of course and not just the quantity of hours for each course. And indeed, I talked to Dean Hutchinson, Associate Dean Gibson, the Registrar's Office, the Student Association as well, College Masters. I'm very familiar with some of them, friends of some of them, and I got their impressions. Language faculty, the Associate Dean from Engineering, etc. And in all cases, I got the impression that distribution was a key issue for any kind of curricular restructure. One of the reasons that distribution became a big issue is that going back to around 2000 was when there was a language requirement which was short-lived. It only lasted for one semester. So it was instituted, immediately was removed. At that point in time, a discussion that ensued was the fact that those courses, first-year courses, language courses, had distribution before the language requirement was removed, but also distribution at that point was not reinstated. So here you have from the Thresher an argument in terms of Lynn Haffer, who is no longer here at Rice, Professor Thompson arguing on both sides of the issue in terms of whether distribution should be reinstated or not. At that point, the decision was not to give distribution to these first-year language courses. There are a number of reasons given for that. In some cases, it was because they were focusing on structure and not culture. In other cases, the argument was because it was not part of a general education course. They were not content courses, and so on and so forth. But essentially, distribution was not accepted. Well, moving forward now, I think this is a crucial issue. As we move forward to this new structure, the quality of the courses is absolutely essential. So it's not just the quantity of hours per course, but it's also the quality of those courses. And if these courses are going to be of much higher quality, they should get distribution. At this point in time, we have requested and we got approved distribution credit for the second, what used to be the second semester, you can call it the second semester intermediate, the first intermediate course. We are in the process of requesting distribution for the first semester as well, the 161 course, which will come into effect in fall 2015. 262, those courses will be brought into the course schedule in spring 2015 already with distribution credit. Now, all of this is actually also connected to study abroad. That has been one of the strategic objectives of the center since I came on board last year. The university also is very interested in study abroad and encouraging students to take those opportunities. So looking at the new sequence in particular, if you have, let's say, Arabic again as any other language, you have the sequence over 2 years, essentially, 4 semesters. The study abroad option we're looking at, in principle, in some cases, it would allow students to finish the sequence of courses. There's no requirement, of course, but the sequence of courses, the 4 semesters, essentially in 1 year. 1 academic year plus 1 summer. So that's something which is on the table, which is a possibility. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way. There are, for this coming summer, 3 study abroad programs. They're called Rising in China, Rising in Spain, and Rising in Jordan. In particular, they're called that way because we send faculty away. So the center is investing on sending these faculty and helping students while they're in these programs, and also trying to monitor the quality of these programs, which is something which is not very typical when commercial companies are in charge of these study abroad options. We're looking into expanding. We're looking up to 10 programs. I don't know whether all of these are going to materialize, but we're very hopeful that in most cases this is going to be the case. These programs will be offered. Another thing that should be mentioned here is that these are going to be, as I mentioned before, faculty-led programs with Rice faculty on site. We're now negotiating with the administration to make sure that these courses will receive direct Rice credit, so you will be able to sign up. Again, this is not final yet, but we're in conversations to get this done. At this point, the biggest issue, I mean, the agreement is pretty much on the table. The issues here, financial issues, how much it's going to cost, and whether there are different ways to handle this. We're also looking into the possibility of increasing the amount of scholarships. Obviously, as we start to grow these programs, we need more funding, more money. But typically, this is funding that we can actually get. Given what we're trying to achieve here, and I think donors will probably be interested in these issues. And of course, we're trying to reduce program costs. Now, let me talk about articulation of the curriculum. This was actually one of the biggest critiques of the 2011 review The argument was that there was an absence of articulation between the center and the departments, and even within the center for each program. Now, this is a big issue. Let me just summarize quickly what the purview of the center is, what courses we manage to administer. And this is first year, second year, and third year level, we manage the 301 and 302. And of course, in the high enrollment languages like Spanish and Chinese, we offer additional courses in Spanish in particular. We have more faculty than even the Spanish and Portuguese department, so obviously we do have the option to offer more courses. So about the 302 level, those courses are taught by other centers, departments. The articulation with other units is necessary in those cases, obviously. Courses taught in English are administered by other units. For example, in German, Spanish, we have courses in the 100, 200 level. Those courses are taught by those departments. They are not taught by the CLIC. And the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, in fact, has written essentially to us a blank check, what I would call a blank check, because they are trusting the work we're doing, the quality we're going to introduce into these courses, and they are already planning to offer up to 6 credit hours for majors in Spanish and Portuguese, up to the 300 courses, and then between 300 and 330, we have the 321, 22, and 23 courses in Spanish, an additional 6 credit hours, so you can get up to 12 credit hours taught by the center, which are going to be accepted by the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. Now, let me talk about the course schedule, which is an issue that has come up in the threshold. Let me take a look at first at Hindi. The argument has been that the 300, 301, and 302 courses have been offered in the past. If you look at the last 6 years, 12 academic semesters, Hindi 301, only 301, has been offered twice, fall 2010 and fall 2011. Notice also that in fall 2011, another course was introduced, Hindi 235, which is a course taught in English. And that started to compete with 301. As you can see, that course continued, and of course that had to be stopped. This is not a course that the center is going to offer. This is a course that, for example, in this case, the Child Center may offer. The same is similar cases with Russian. So only 4 times, twice 301 and twice 302 has been offered in the last 6 years, 12 academic semesters. The proposal we have now for the future curricular structure would immediately offer these courses in a more frequent basis. And if enrollments are there, we can actually increase those offerings even more. The other issue that came up in the editorial, I don't know what the source of information was about independent study. Independent study continues to be in the books. There's no reason to remove these. We really consider these very important courses. What we have changed, actually it hasn't changed, but it had not been actually enforced, was the idea that any independent study has to have permission from the department, and it has to have a syllabus. It has to be an agreement between the faculty and the student in terms of what they have to do. That has to be implemented, but those independent courses are not going to go away ever, as far as I can tell. Finally, let me just mention a couple of things in order to continue open discussion. Something with the faculty. The faculty are extremely important for the center. So a number of things we've implemented this semester, this academic year actually, is a number of professional development workshops which didn't exist before. We have created an executive committee which is in charge of a number of these curricular issues, and they are the ones who basically give me information, and eventually as we move forward, the executive committee will be in charge of most of the decisions. We have created, and this is going to be implemented next year, a career path for lecturers, so they have opportunities to grow in terms of rank. We have implemented salary increases, and one thing I want to mention here is that the budget we have for the center this year is actually less than the previous year if you adjust for inflation, but we have increased salaries, so we've been able to administer the funding for the center in a much more rational way. In some of the cases, we asked faculty to work on the redesign of these courses, and in particular this year, because of the amount of work we are paying them for 2 weeks of work looking at these courses and trying to redesign them, so we're trying to take care of the faculty and make sure that they get the resources. And finally, we offer course releases for people who want to continue to redesign courses as we move forward. I want to stop here because I know there are questions, and we'll be happy to answer those questions as far as we can, and the dean is going to help me out here, but he can stay there.
I'm just here for my deputy values.
I think she was first.
My name is Sarah. I was the one who actually I wrote you earlier. So I saw on the threshold that the leader of the independent review is from Stanford. And I looked up their language course or their language center, and their first year languages are 4 to 5 credits. So I guess my question is twofold. Like, why would she recommend something that her university doesn't use? And are there actually any universities that use this 6-year introductory program?
Well, first of all, she was not the only member of the committee. There were 4 members of the committee, and obviously what the committee recommended may not necessarily coincide with any one of those committee members may do, actually. And obviously, their university is different than other universities, so I'm not going to try to guess what the reason was, but I would say that that would be my first guess about that. Now, the second issue in terms of what other universities offer these programs, University of Texas, for example, offers not just 2 courses of 6 hours, but 3 semesters of 6 hours each, up to 18 hours, which is equivalent to what we have here. And they have implemented that for a while, and it's quite successful.
Also, Stanford, they do meet 5 days a week in the beginning of every class.
Okay. And I guess if I can just follow up. So you mentioned in your presentation that the previous model was to have 3 classroom hours and 2 lab hours. But personally, that wasn't my experience. We did meet 5 days a week in the classroom. So I'm just wondering how this is a change other than an increase in credit hours. I mean, I know obviously the overall scheme has changed, but...
You're talking about the last 2 years, probably, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the one that I mentioned before in terms of the hybrid model that the committee, the external committee criticized was the previous model. In other words, students got 5 credit hours for 3 class meetings plus 2 hours in the lab. But that was before your time, probably. So what your experience was the change that happened after that review in 2011, it was implemented in 2012, I guess?
Well, they started trying to implement more hours per week in accordance with the review, but it was done in a rather haphazard way. So some languages did it one way, some other languages did it another way. It wasn't terribly successful. What Rafael is trying to do, and Dr. Salazar, what he's trying to do is make it uniform across languages, so we have a common sequence. And let me go on about this. First of all, the committee came and they said that this hybrid model with only 3 contact hours between teachers and students a week was not working. We also had anecdotal information of sending our students, for example, to programs in China. And they would get back and say, the worst students we had were from Rice. They were the least prepared. We took them because they were Rice students, but they had a really steep learning curve. We had other evidence. This committee came in and said, well, we use the same textbook you do, but we get through much more of it than you do because you don't have enough contact hours. And there's extremely good research behind the notion that you have to have the contact hours. Languages are not easy. And I think Rice tried to dilute their language too much. This is my impression. When we invited the review committee in, this is what they recommended, that we had to increase contact hours, particularly in the first year. Yes?
So I came in as not an engineer for this year, which if you're a freshman engineer who comes in without 18 credit, you have to take chemistry, physics, and math traditionally in your freshman year along with this class. And that includes, so if you take out the 6-hour language, that puts you at 20 hours, which is considered a really excessive number of hours, especially looking at the engineering course plans. So what would your suggestion be for students who are not majoring in engineering but would also like to get a language class?
Well, there would be 2 suggestions. First, you would petition to be able to take an overload, which you can do. The second thing you would do... Well, you can't. Well, then the other thing is, do you have to do this course in your freshman year? Why can't you start a language in your sophomore year?
Well, if you'd like to complete up to the former, if you want to keep going from your beginning year, you continue on.
I'm sorry, what?
If you just wanted to do as a freshman beginning language or to continue.
Well, you know, this is a very difficult issue. And what I'm going to say is going to sound a little harsh, perhaps. I know that the engineers have a very heavy and rigid course schedule. But to what degree do we dilute our courses in languages to accommodate that schedule? We have to say that these languages are the best, these programs are the best we can do, that they're really worthy of Rice. That we have languages courses at Rice that are the best in the country. This is what our goal is. Now, there's going to be some tension here, and then that's inevitable. But I don't think we can go to the thing that we're going to dilute our courses in languages simply because they can't fit into the schedule of every student at Rice. We will try to do whatever we can. The summer courses we're developing primarily to accommodate people who cannot take languages during the regular school year. But there are going to be tensions here. You can't get around it. Yes?
If we think that learning foreign languages is something that is important for people, not just in the humanities, but in general, especially given that we're an ever more globalized world. How is it reasonable to say that if you're an engineer and you want to learn a language, well, too bad because you don't have time for the language courses that we want to offer?
We will work with you however we can to accommodate your schedule and make sure you get the language instruction that we think you need. That's, and then like I say, we're not going to be able to be 100% on this.
Let me add one thing. When I met with the Social Dean of Engineering, Mark Sinclair, I think is his name, I discussed this issue over the 6 hours and I asked him what the issues would be. And his biggest concern was distribution. We didn't discuss anything else. I mean, he said that, well, those hours, we can figure it out. I mean, I don't know exactly what he meant by that. He's probably more familiar than me. But the issue he wanted to discuss was distribution. And he told me, if you can get distribution, I'm not going to participate in this because I'm not in the humanities. So you have to deal with this issue. But if you can get distribution for these courses, I think that makes a huge difference for us. Now, obviously, what he was telling me is that this is not a panacea. We will not be able to solve all the problems. But distribution is a thing that I'm going to ask you to work on in order to have my support.
And we have allowed distribution credit for the second semester, which is new.
On the slide, it said that you requested D1 credit for first semester classes. Could you please explain what requested means? In the future, could you potentially get D1 credit for the first semester class?
Oh, no, requested means from my end, meaning that I want the School of Humanities to grant distribution credit for these courses perpetually, meaning that all the time. So whenever you sign up, what is it?
Do you think your request has a chance of being approved?
I think so. I think the dean probably can have a better.
I knew he was going to do that. There are several factors here. I mean, I personally think that first semester language instruction should get D1 credit. I get pushback from my faculty though. They say, well, if they get D1 credit for first semester, Spanish, Chinese, whatever, then they're not going to take a course in Shakespeare. There's also the faculty senate several years ago actually took a resolution saying that first year courses would not get distribution credit. This is what Rafael referred to. But that was when they had this short-lived language requirement. So personally, I support the D1 credit, but there are several people who have to offer their opinion on this before we can actually go forward with it. My guess is that it will happen. That language courses from first semester will get D1 credit.
I think those courses should get distribution because of the type of course we're teaching. All the arguments which have been advanced in the past not to get distribution have totally disappeared. So the argument for distribution is there. And right now what we're doing is contacting faculty because we want these requests to be approved, not unanimously, but at least with a great amount of support. Right now, I would say yes. I'm willing to say it.
Well, and what is happening, I mean, what Rafael has not been able to talk about as much as I would have liked to have heard, is the way we're changing the content of these courses. These courses, it used to be people would say, well, first year language shouldn't get D1 credit because it's a skills course. But we're adding much more content, much more cultural content. We're also going to be pushing much harder for students to take advantage of summer courses abroad. Under this new scheme, people could actually go abroad after their first year, which was not the case before. So we're creating opportunities, we're looking for scholarship money to make this very easy for people to spend 6 to 8 weeks studying a language in a foreign country. And also, as Rafael was saying, we have this scheme that will allow students to have rights credit for those courses, so you don't have to take them as transfer credit. They'll actually go immediately into your transcript. Yes.
I understand that the contact hours is an issue, and I guess if there was some ambiguity between the different languages as to the 5 days a week, then that is a problem that needs to be solved. But what's the reasoning for going from 5 days a week like it is currently, in at least some languages, to only 3 days a week and 2-hour blocks, which are going to be much harder to fit in schedules and have actually less days of actually working on the language?
Well, it's actually interesting. When I started looking at this issue, at one point I realized that the 5 hours a week was done differently by some languages. I didn't know this. And I started asking questions, and German and a bunch of different languages had actually de facto moved into that system of 3 days a week in blocks of not 2 hours because you have to complete 5 hours, it was 1.5 hours or so. So they were already doing this, and they did this because they were trying to react to the situation. They were essentially imposed this on them, a system which in my mind doesn't make any sense. For example, in Spanish, really, some of you, if you have taken Spanish, from the point of view of the faculty in particular, that was unsustainable. So you have faculty meeting, teaching actually loads of 24, 27 hours, which was unimaginable, when in fact we should have been teaching 18, because they were trying to fill the gaps for those 3 hours they were teaching on a regular schedule, and they were trying to offer students different slots of those 2 hours, Tuesday and Thursday, but of course they had to offer many slots, and that means that was an overload in terms of the faculty. That has an effect also in terms of the quality of those courses for the students. That was not sustainable. And some languages reacted quickly. They actually went against the rules that were imposed at that time, and they came up with essentially a de facto system which we're trying to implement now.
Also, we took this up with the registrar, and the advice we got from the registrar's office, first of all, we're going to try and schedule these first-year language courses not at the suite times. The suite times are 10 to 12 any day of the week. So we're trying to schedule our language courses around that. So they might be earlier than that, they might be later in the afternoon. The second thing that we were told by the registrar is that for many students, scheduling a course 5 days a week is much more difficult because it occupies time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the way this new schedule will work is you're completely free on Tuesdays and Thursdays to take other courses. So I don't think it's at all clear that this will be harder to take. In fact, our advice from the registrar is that it probably will not be. And again, we're going to head for not the suite times, and then we're going to free up Tuesdays and Thursdays without any language courses at all. Now, what is he basing his advice on? Availability of rooms, that sort of thing. So I'm not persuaded at all that this will be harder to schedule than the 5 days a week, which I think will be harder to schedule for a lot of people. Yes.
Hi, I have a more personal question. I'm currently a junior who's an Asian Studies major, and I'm at the 202 level currently, but the Asian Studies major requires 300 to graduate, and my 300 level class is now being shifted from fall to spring, so I can't graduate.
Yes, you can. I already talked to the interim director of the Child Center.
Yeah.
I don't know who gave you the information, but he assured me that, first of all, he has not received any request for any exceptions, but he will process that and no student will not graduate because of that requirement.
But I want to become fluent in my language, so I want the class, but I want to be able to become more fluent in the language, so I want to take that whole class. So you're saying that I need to wait instead?
What I'm saying is that in certain situations, let me say two things here. The first thing I want to say is what I already said in terms of the number of courses, in particular in some Asian studies like Hindi or Russian. The number of sections offered in the past has been lower than we're planning to offer in the future. That's the first thing. So in terms of chances of someone graduating in the future compared to the past is going to be higher in terms of hitting that particular semester when that course is offered. There's no question about that. That's math. The second issue is transitions. Obviously, you are in a transition. What I'm saying is that I already got assurances from the Child Center in particular that they will work with you in order to make sure that you don't have any penalties which are not of your own making. But then again, the transition is a transition. So we're transitioning to a much better system, in particular in terms of offering those courses, in Asian languages in particular. So Hindi, as you can see, has not been offered, not even a 301 for a number of years. We're going to fix that. Now, it's going to be offered in the spring. And we're actually, in Hindi, we're working on that because there was another issue that I found out lately. There was a mistake that was made that may prompt us in this particular case to maybe open a section just because of that particular mistake from the past, not because of the transition.
Now, the other thing that I would point out here, now you're caught in the transition, as Rafael is saying. But in the future, people like you, we would do everything we possibly could to make sure you do one of these years in an intensive summer program, which we'd subsidize. And that would be in Korea, that would be in Japan, that would be in China. So we're moving in that direction. I'm sorry that you're not a sophomore instead of a junior or whatever, but are you a junior or are you a senior? You're a junior. Well, what can I say? Future sophomores and juniors will have an easier time on it because of these summer programs.
So we can take one more question. I know we're a little over time, but we just have time for one more.
Okay, perhaps somebody who hasn't asked? I don't know. Okay, go ahead.
So I just sort of a question that backtracks into that, which is, if the idea is more contact hours, then why is having that 300 level of the smaller language offered in the spring, like more favorable, in which case the student will have a semester on, which is potentially then to lose language skills. So you're actually losing contact time in the fall semester following.
I didn't get the question.
So, having a 3-year level in the language like question in the spring means that there will be time off between the spring semester and the fall semester. So the increasing contact hours is equal, that actually creates sort of a transition in contact hours if the student won't have a language for a semester. And how do you address that?
There are a couple of issues there. The 301 courses, if we look, for example, the fall 2013 semester, most of those courses didn't really make it. So we were in the red. In many of those cases, we have 3 students only in those courses. The dean's office does not allow us to keep those courses open with at least, if we have less than 5 students, fewer than 5 students. So we actually kept those courses going, and we asked for permission, and special permission from the dean's office to get those courses going. All 4 courses.
Which were authorized.
He did authorize us, but obviously he frowns upon many of those exceptions, and with good reason. I mean, also we don't want to be offering courses with 3 or 2 students. I mean, they become almost independent studies. That was in the fall. So one thing which is clear is that in spring, those courses tend to have more students. Now that's a projection. We don't know exactly what that's going to be maintained in the future or not, number one. Number 2 is that, the other thing we noticed is that if you take the 301 in the spring and you continue in the fall, that's probably the quickest way to maintain, we cannot offer in some of those languages, those courses every semester. That's a reality in terms of enrollment numbers. So if you offer once in the fall, and then you continue in the next fall, you have a long delay. So it's probably better just to do the spring and fall, 302 in particular. And we want to be able to offer 302 courses. That's the other thing we notice in Hindi, for example. The 302 is not being offered. We want to offer the course. We want to make sure that students get all the sequence of courses that they need to get. Now, of course, this is a game of figuring out where you put your resources. In many cases, we have only one faculty teaching those languages. We want to grow those enrollments and be able to even hire more people. So as soon as you have 2 faculty teaching there, I know the dean is probably not in agreement with me, but I think if the center grows, I think the dean's office will support that. But right now, we don't have those numbers. And we need to try to maximize the chances that the students who want to take certain courses will take them. Now, obviously, given the resources we have, we can offer these courses every semester. That's a given.
But what we would really, really like is for that summer to be spent abroad.
Sorry, so I think at this time we're really over time. So any other questions? I'm sure Dean Shumway.
Yeah, come and visit. We're around. It'd be great.
Thank you for the advisory board idea. That was a suggestion from the Student Association president and vice president, etc. I forgot the titles here. But I think that's a great idea. That may be a way to get more fluid communication between the center and the students. So we welcome all sorts of suggestions.
Yeah, so with the passing of that resolution, we will be formally recommending to the different committees and CLIC to form that. We'll be soliciting students to join that committee. Rita will send out an email. But certainly we welcome anyone who's interested in the topic, taking classes, to join. And it's our hope that that group will start meeting early next year. But thank you to Dean Shumway and Dr. Salagri for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Is there a motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I call this meeting closed at 9:09.
Thank you.